The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital hummed with a low, electric buzz that seemed to vibrate in the teeth of everyone working the night shift. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour when the city outside slept deeply. But inside the emergency department, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, stale coffee, and impending disaster. In Bay 4, a man lay still, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged gasps that sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He was unconscious, intubated, and surrounded by a team of specialists who were moving with the frantic, disjointed energy of people who knew they were losing control. At the foot of the bed stood Dr. Marcus Thorne, the chief of emergency medicine, a man whose reputation was built on arrogance as much as medical skill. His face was flushed, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered beneath his skin. He barked orders that contradicted each other, his voice rising in pitch with every passing second. The monitors screamed their warnings, a cacophony of red lights and shrill alarms that pierced the sterile silence of the rest of the ward. And standing in the corner, partially obscured by the shadow of a supply cabinet, was Elena Vance. She was a nurse, but not the kind who commanded attention. She was small, slight of frame, with hair pulled back into a severe bun that revealed a face devoid of makeup or expression. Her scrubs were plain navy, slightly faded from too many washes, and she held herself with a stillness that bordered on invisibility. To the doctors rushing around the bed, she was furniture. She was part of the background noise, a pair of hands available for fetching supplies or holding limbs, but never for thinking, never for leading. Dr. Thorne had snapped at her 10 minutes ago for breathing too loudly while he tried to concentrate. He had called her Ghost Girl, a nickname that had stuck among the junior residents, meant to imply that she was there but not really present, a hollow shell of a healthcare worker who lacked the fire and intellect required for true medicine. Elena said nothing. She simply watched. Her eyes, dark and unnervingly steady, tracked the rise and fall of the patient's chest, the flicker of the cardiac monitor, the subtle tremor in the left hand of the anesthesiologist. She did not speak. She did not move unless spoken to. But inside, behind the calm mask of her profession, a clock was ticking down. She knew something they didn't. She knew that the man in the bed was not just a John Doe found collapsed on a park bench. She knew that his physiology was reacting to a threat that wasn't visible on any scan, a threat that required a specific, counterintuitive intervention that no one in the room was considering. And she knew that if she spoke up now, she would be ridiculed. If she acted without permission, she would be fired. But if she did nothing, the man would die within 4 minutes. If you are enjoying this story of hidden strength and quiet dignity, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring more narratives of justice and redemption to your feed. Your support means the world to our community of storytellers. The hierarchy at St. Jude S was not written in any employee handbook, but it was etched into the very architecture of the building. The upper floors, with their private rooms and panoramic views of the city skyline, belonged to the surgeons and the administrators, the gods of the hospital ecosystem. The emergency department, located in the basement level, was the trenches. It was where the messy, unpredictable reality of human frailty crashed against the rigid structures of medical protocol. And within those trenches, there was a king. Dr. Marcus Thorne ruled the ER with an iron fist wrapped in a silk glove of academic prestige. He was 45, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with silver-streaked hair that he styled meticulously even at 3 in the morning. He had graduated from Johns Hopkins, completed his residency at Mayo Clinic, and published more papers on trauma care than most doctors read in a lifetime. He believed with every fiber of his being that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. And because he was rich, connected, and undeniably talented in standard procedures, the hospital administration allowed him to behave as if he were untouchable. Elena Vance had been at St. Jude S for 6 months. She was 32, though she looked younger, her face unlined by the cynicism that seemed to plague her colleagues. She had arrived with impeccable references from a hospital in Virginia that had closed due to budget cuts, but no one had bothered to call them. No one had asked why a nurse with such perfect credentials would leave a prestigious position to work the graveyard shift in a chaotic urban ER. They assumed she was mediocre, someone who couldn't cut it in the high-pressure environments of the top-tier institutions. They assumed she was quiet because she had nothing to say. Dr. Thorne had made this assumption explicit during her orientation. He had looked her up and down, sneering slightly at her modest demeanor, and told her, "We need nurses who can anticipate, Miss Vance, not statues. Try to keep up." Since then, he had relegated her to the most menial tasks. She changed bedpans. She restocked linens. She cleaned blood off the floors, while the residents discussed complex cases over her head, treating her presence as irrelevant. But there were cracks in the facade, small moments that went unnoticed by the arrogant majority but were seen by those who cared to look. There was the time a young intern had dropped a tray of surgical instruments, creating a deafening clatter that startled a seizing patient. Before anyone could react, Alina had moved. It wasn't a rush, it was a fluid, economical motion. She had stepped between the patient and the noise, shielding his senses, and simultaneously secured the patient's airway with a precision that made the attending nurse blink in surprise. She had done it without a word, without seeking praise, and had immediately stepped back into the shadows. Another time, during a mass casualty incident from a bus accident, the triage system had collapsed under the weight of panic. Doctors were shouting, patients were bleeding, and order had disintegrated. Alina had walked to the center of the chaos, picked up a whiteboard marker, and begun assigning colors. She didn't shout. She simply pointed, labeled, and directed. Within 3 minutes, the flow of patients had stabilized. The charge nurse had thanked her, but Dr. Thorne had walked by, glanced at the organized board, and muttered, "Luck," before dismissing her contribution entirely. These breadcrumbs of competence were scattered throughout her tenure, ignored by those who refused to see value in silence. But for Alina, they were survival mechanisms. She kept her head down. She endured the snide comments about her deer-in-headlights look. She accepted the extra shifts no one else wanted. She endured the humiliation of being blamed for missing supplies that she had explicitly reported as out of stock. She did it because she needed the job, yes, but also because she was waiting. Waiting for what she rarely allowed herself to think. Perhaps she was waiting for a place where her skills would be respected. Or perhaps she was simply hiding, using the anonymity of the hospital uniform to bury a past that was too loud, too violent, and too dangerous for civilian life. We're just getting started. If you want to stay updated with the next chapter of Alina's journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We post deep-dive narratives every week that explore the triumph of the human spirit against overwhelming odds. Culture of the ER was toxic, fed by the ego of its leader. Residents competed for Dr. Thorne's approval like dogs fighting for scraps. They mocked Alina openly in the break room, mimicking her quiet walk, calling her the mouse. One resident, a brash young man named Kevin, had once spilled coffee on her scrubs and laughed when she didn't react. "Cat got your tongue, Vance?" he had jeered. Alina had simply wiped the stain with a paper towel and walked away. Her restraint was mistaken for weakness. Her silence was interpreted as ignorance. What they didn't understand was that Alina's silence was a discipline. It was a choice. In her previous life, words had been scarce commodities, used only when necessary, when lives depended on clarity and brevity. In the military, chatter got you killed. In the special operations community she had once belonged to, silence was a weapon. It allowed you to listen, to observe, to process information faster than those who were busy hearing themselves speak. But here, in the civilian world, that discipline was viewed as a defect. The patient in Bay 4, the John Doe, had been brought in by paramedics 2 hours earlier. He had been found unconscious in Central Park near the reservoir. No ID, no phone, just a man in his late 40s, muscular build, wearing expensive but torn clothing. He had no visible wounds, no signs of drug use, no history available. His vitals were unstable, fluctuating wildly without apparent cause. The initial workup had shown nothing. CT scan clear. Blood tox screen negative. EKG showing irregular sinus rhythm but nothing definitive. Dr. Thorne had diagnosed it as idiopathic syncope with secondary complications, a fancy way of saying we don't know, but it's probably nothing serious. He had ordered fluids and observation, but as the night progressed, the patient's condition had deteriorated. His blood pressure had dropped. His oxygen saturation had plummeted. And now, at 3:14 a.m., he was crashing. Dr. Thorne was sweating. He wiped his forehead with the back of his gloved hand, leaving a smear of perspiration. "Push another amp of epi," he shouted at the anesthesiologist. "Get me a central line now." The team scrambled. Needles were prepared, lines were primed. The chaos intensified. Alina watched from the corner. She saw the subtle cyanosis tinting the patient's lips. She saw the way his pupils were pinpoint, not dilated. She saw the faint, almost imperceptible twitch in his right quadriceps. These were not signs of cardiac failure. These were signs of neurotoxicity. Specifically, signs of exposure to a nerve agent variant that suppressed the parasympathetic nervous system while causing massive sympathetic overload. It was rare. It was exotic. And it was something Alina had seen before. Not in a hospital, not in a textbook, but in the field. She took a half step forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of recognition. She knew the protocol, she knew the antidote. But she also knew the hierarchy. If she interrupted Dr. Thorne now, if she suggested that his diagnosis was wrong, he would explode. He would humiliate her. He would likely remove her from the room. And in the time it took for that confrontation to play out, the patient would die. She hesitated. The moral weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders. Was her pride worth a man's life? Was her fear of rejection stronger than her duty to save? She looked at Dr. Thorne, who was now yelling at a nurse to do something useful. She looked at the patient, whose life was slipping away second by second. She made her choice. Before we dive into the crisis, let us know in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew the answer but were afraid to speak up? Share your stories below. We read every single one. Alina stepped out of the shadows. Her movement was smooth, deliberate. She didn't run, she didn't shout. She walked to the side of the bed, directly into Dr. Thorne's line of sight. "Doctor," she said. Her voice was low, calm, and steady. It cut through the noise of the room like a knife through water. Dr. Thorne spun around, his eyes blazing with irritation. "What? I didn't ask for your input, Vance. Get back to the wall." Alina didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on his. "He's not having a cardiac event," she said. "He's exhibiting signs of organophosphate poisoning, likely a synthetic variant. Look at the meiosis. Look at the fasciculations in the quad. If you push more epinephrine, you'll trigger a fatal arrhythmia." The room went silent. For a split second, the only sound was the rhythmic beep of the monitor. The resident stopped moving. The anesthesiologist lowered the syringe. All eyes turned to Dr. Thorne. Thorne's face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruising on the patient's arm. He stepped closer to Alina, invading her personal space, towering over her slight frame. "Organophosphate," he spat the word out like poison. "From what? He was found in a park. There's no chemical spill. There's no terrorism alert. You're reading fantasy novels, Vance. Get out now." Alina didn't move. "The symptoms match," she insisted, her voice remaining level. "Atropine, pralidoxime, now. Or he dies in 3 minutes." Thorne laughed, a harsh, barking sound that lacked any humor. "You're fired," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Security, get this incompetent nurse out of my ER. She's endangering patients with her delusions." 2 security guards, who had been standing by the door, moved forward. They looked uncomfortable, but they obeyed the chief. They reached for Alina's arms. Alina didn't resist. She knew that physical resistance would only validate Thorne's narrative of her instability. She allowed them to take her elbows, but she kept her eyes on the patient. "Check his acetylcholinesterase levels," she said to the anesthesiologist, ignoring Thorne. "Just check it. It takes 30 seconds. The anesthesiologist, a woman named Sarah who had always been kind to Alina, hesitated. She looked at Thorne, then at the patient, then at Alina. Thorne screamed, "Do not listen to her. Push the epi." Sarah's hand hovered over the syringe. The tension in the room was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. Alina was being dragged toward the door. Her feet slid on the polished floor. She didn't struggle. She just watched. She watched the needle enter the patient's IV port. She watched the plunger go down. And then she watched the monitor. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the heart rate spiked. 180, 200, 220. The QRS complex widened. The waveform became chaotic, ventricular fibrillation. The patient's body arched off the bed, seized by the electrical storm raging in his heart. "Code blue," someone shouted. "Charge to 200. Thorne froze. His face went pale. He stared at the monitor, his mind unable to process the rapid deterioration. He had followed the standard protocol for cardiac arrest, but the underlying cause had not been addressed. The epinephrine had fueled the fire. Alina, still held by the security guards, closed her eyes for a brief moment. She had predicted this. She had warned him, and now the man was dying because of pride. This is a pivotal moment in the story. If you're feeling the tension, please share this video with a friend who appreciates intense, character-driven dramas. Your shares help these stories reach more people. The defibrillator paddles charged with a high-pitched whine. "Clear," Thorne shouted, his voice cracking. The patient's body jerked as the shock delivered. The monitor flatlined for a terrifying second, then resumed its chaotic fibrillation. "Again, charge to 300. Thorne was panicking now. The cool, collected surgeon was gone, replaced by a frightened man who realized he was losing control. The residents were shouting conflicting instructions. The nurses were running for crash cart supplies. Chaos reigned. And in the midst of it, Alina broke free. She didn't fight the guards with brute force. She used leverage, a simple twist of her wrist, a shift of her weight, and she slipped out of their grasp. It was a move born of training, not aggression. She stepped back into the room. Thorne saw her. "Get her out," he roared, But Alina ignored him. She walked to the crash cart. She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed a vial of atropine and a syringe. She drew up the dose with practiced speed, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Stop shocking him," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. "It's not working. You're treating the symptom, not the cause." Thorne moved to block her, but Sarah, the anesthesiologist, stepped in front of him. "Let her try," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "Marcus, look at the pupils. She's right, it's tox." Thorne hesitated. The doubt crept in. The evidence was undeniable. The patient was not responding to ACLS protocols. He was dying in a way that didn't make sense. And Alina, the quiet nurse, was the only one with an explanation. Alina pushed past Thorne. She approached the patient. She checked the IV line. She injected the atropine. Then she grabbed the pralidoxime. "I need help with the infusion," she said, looking at Sarah. Sarah nodded and moved to assist. Together, they administered the antidotes. The room watched in stunned silence. Dr. Thorne stood frozen, his hands hanging at his sides, his authority shattered. He watched as Alina worked, her movements efficient, precise, and confident. She wasn't the mouse anymore. She was a commander. She checked the monitor. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The heart rate began to slow. 180, 160, 140. The fibrillation ceased. Sinus rhythm returned, strong, steady. The oxygen saturation began to climb, 85%, 90%, 95%. The color returned to the patient's face. The cyanosis faded. He was alive. Take a breath. The immediate danger has passed, but the fallout is just beginning. If you're invested in Alina's vindication, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the confrontation that's coming next. The silence that followed was heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. The monitors beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. The patient breathed on his own, the ventilator assisting but not controlling. Alina stepped back from the bed. She capped the syringe and placed it in the sharps container. She peeled off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. She didn't look at Thorne. She didn't look at the residents. She looked at Sarah. "Call toxicology," she said softly. "Tell them to run a specific panel for nerve agents and notify the CDC. This isn't natural." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with awe. "Yes, Alina, right away." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. The sound was awkward, forced. He straightened his lab coat, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "Well," he said, his voice lacking its usual boom, It seems the patient has stabilized. Good work, team." He tried to include himself in the team, but no one looked at him. The residents stared at the floor. The nurses avoided his gaze. The victory belonged to Alina, and everyone knew it. Thorne turned to Alina. His eyes were cold, filled with a mixture of shame and rage. "Vance," he said, "my office, now." It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Alina nodded. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply followed him out of the bay, leaving the stunned staff behind. The walk to Thorne's office was long and silent. The corridors of the hospital were empty, the lights dimmed for the night. Alina's footsteps echoed on the tile. She kept her head high, but her stomach churned. She knew what was coming. Thorne would not thank her. He would not acknowledge his error. He would punish her for exposing his incompetence. He would frame her insubordination as a threat to hospital safety. He would use his power to crush her. And she knew with a sinking feeling that the administration would likely side with him. Thorne was a revenue generator. He was a star. Alina was a nobody, a replaceable nurse with a mysterious past. They entered T.H. Orne's office. It was large, decorated with framed diplomas and awards. A view of the city lights glowed through the window. Thorne closed the door and locked it. The click of the lock sounded final. He walked behind his desk and sat down, steepling his fingers. He looked at Alina with disdain. "You have a problem with authority, Vance," he began. "You undermined me in front of my staff. You administered medication without a direct order. You violated protocol. Do you have any idea the liability you've created?" Alina stood still. "I saved his life," she said. "You were killing him." Thorne slammed his hand on the desk. "I was following standard ACLS guidelines. You diagnosed a rare toxicity based on what? Hunches, feelings? You're not a doctor, Vance. You're a nurse. Your job is to follow orders, not to play God." "I followed the Hippocratic Oath," Alina replied, her voice steady. "First, do no harm. You were causing harm. I stopped it." Thorne stood up. He walked around the desk, approaching her again. "You're reckless. You're unstable. I've heard the rumors, the way you move, the way you stare. You're not fit for this hospital. I'm suspending you, effective immediately. Pending a full review of your credentials and your actions tonight, I will be recommending termination. You will hand over your badge and your keys, now." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. Suspension, termination. It was what she had feared, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. The lie was over. She didn't belong here anyway. She had tried to blend in, to be normal, but her nature had revealed itself. and now she was being cast out for it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID badge. She placed it on the desk. "Will the patient survive?" she asked. Thorne sneered. "That's none of your concern. You're done here. Get out." Alina turned and walked to the door. She unlocked it and stepped out into the hallway. She didn't look back. She walked to the locker room, changed out of her scrubs, and put on her civilian clothes. A simple black jacket, jeans, boots. She packed her bag. She left the hospital through the staff exit into the cold night air. The city was waking up. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Alina stood on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath. She was unemployed, she was disgraced, but she was alive, and she knew the truth. The patient was alive because of her. That had to be enough. It feels unjust, doesn't it? To see competence punished while ego is rewarded. If you're feeling that frustration, type "justice for Alina" in the comments. Let's show her some support. The next 24 hours were a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. Alina sat in her small apartment staring at the wall. She didn't sleep. She waited for the call from HR. She waited for the official letter of termination. She reviewed her finances. She had savings, but not enough to last long. She considered her options. She could leave the city. She could go back to Virginia. She could disappear again. But part of her wanted to fight. Part of her wanted to clear her name. But how? Who would believe a suspended nurse over the chief of emergency medicine? She felt powerless. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her isolation. Meanwhile, at St. Jude's, the atmosphere was tense. The patient in Bay 4, now identified as a foreign diplomat's aide, was recovering. The toxicology report had come back positive for a rare synthetic nerve agent, consistent with Alina's diagnosis. The CDC had been notified. The FBI had arrived to interview the hospital staff. Dr. Thorne was under pressure. He had to explain why he had missed the diagnosis. He had to explain why he had nearly killed a high-profile patient. He spun a narrative. He claimed that Alina had acted erratically. He claimed that she had confused the staff. He claimed that the patient's stabilization was a coincidence, a result of the supportive care he had ordered. He painted Alina as a rogue element, a danger to the hospital. The administration, fearful of lawsuits and bad press, began to distance themselves from her. They prepared the termination papers. But there was one person who wasn't buying it. Sarah, the anesthesiologist, had documented everything. She had recorded the timeline. She had saved the monitor strips. She knew the truth, and she was angry. She tried to speak to the hospital administrator, but she was shut down. "Stick to your lane, Sarah," she was told. "Don't get involved in HR matters." Sarah felt helpless. She wanted to help Alina, but she feared for her own career. She sent a text to Alina. "I'm sorry, I tried." "They're not listening." Alina read the text and deleted it. She expected nothing less. On the second day, Alina received a call. It was not from HR. It was from a number she didn't recognize. She answered it cautiously. "Ms. Vance," a voice said. It was male, deep, and authoritative. "This is Colonel James Sterling, United States Army, retired. I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Alina's heart skipped a beat. Sterling. The name triggered a memory, a mission, a base in Germany, a commander who had valued her skills above all else. "Colonel," she said, her voice tightening, "I'm listening." "I heard about what happened at St. Jude's," Sterling said. "I have friends in the intelligence community. They flagged the incident. A nurse diagnosing a nerve agent. That's not common knowledge, Alina. That's specialized training. I'm coming to see you. Don't leave town." The line went dead. Alina sat in silence. The past had caught up with her, and this time it wasn't coming to punish her. It was coming to save her. The plot thickens. Who is Colonel Sterling? And how does he connect to Alina's past? Keep watching to find out. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the reveal. Colonel James Sterling arrived an hour later. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a face weathered by decades of service. He wore a suit that fit perfectly, but he carried himself with the loose-limbed grace of a soldier. He knocked on Alina's door. She opened it. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. "Alina," he said, "you look tired." She smiled faintly. "It's been a long week, sir." He stepped inside. He didn't sit. He paced the small living room. "I read the report," he said. "Thorne is a fool, but he's a protected fool. The hospital is going to fire you to cover his ass. They're calling it gross insubordination. They're saying you posed a threat to patient safety." Alina nodded. "I know." Sterling stopped pacing. He looked at her. "But I know who you are, Alina. I know what you did in Kandahar. I know what you did in the Black Sea. You're not just a nurse. You're a medic, a specialist, a survivor, and you're one of the best I've ever served with." Alina looked down. "That life is over, Colonel. I'm just a nurse now." "No," Sterling said firmly. "You're never just anything. You're a warrior, and warriors don't let injustice stand, not when it affects the innocent. That patient, he's alive because of you, and Thorne, he's a fraud. I'm not going to let them bury you." Alina looked up. What can you do? He's the chief. I'm nobody. Sterling smiled, a cold, predatory smile. You're not nobody, Alina. You're a veteran. You have rights. And I have connections. I'm not going to fight this in the HR department. I'm going to fight it in the court of public opinion, and I'm going to bring in some heavy artillery. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling in a favor from someone who owes me, someone who has more authority than any hospital administrator in this city. Who was he calling? Alina didn't ask. She trusted Sterling. He had never led her astray. He had saved her life more than once. If he said he had a plan, she believed him. But she was still afraid of the exposure, afraid of the spotlight. She had spent 6 years hiding. Did she really want to step back into the light? Sterling saw her hesitation. Alina, he said softly, you didn't hide because you were ashamed. You hid because you were healing. But healing doesn't mean silence. It means finding your voice again. Let me help you find it. Alina took a deep breath. She nodded. Okay, she said. What do we do? We're approaching the climax. The stakes are higher than ever. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit the like button to let us know you're with Alina all the way. The next morning, St. Jude's Hospital was buzzing with activity. The FBI agents were still there. The media had caught wind of the diplomat poisoning story. Reporters were camped out in the lobby. Dr. Thorne was giving interviews, positioning himself as the hero who had stabilized the patient despite the chaos. He was smiling for the cameras, shaking hands, projecting confidence. He had no idea that a storm was brewing. At 10:00 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the main entrance. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't an ambulance. It was a government vehicle, unmarked but imposing. 2 men in suits got out. They didn't speak to the reporters. They walked straight into the hospital, flashing badges that made the security guards step aside without question. They went to the administration office. They asked for the CEO. They asked for Dr. Thorne, and they asked for Alina Vance's personnel file. Within minutes, the hospital was on lockdown. The CEO, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, was summoned to the conference room. Dr. Thorne was called in, looking annoyed at the interruption. What is this? Thorne demanded. I'm in the middle of a press briefing. One of the men, a stern-faced individual with silver hair, looked at Thorne. Sit down, doctor, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that brooked no argument. Thorne sat. The other man, younger but equally intense, placed a folder on the table. We are here to investigate a potential breach of national security protocols, he said, and to address a complaint of professional misconduct involving a federal asset. Thorne frowned. Federal asset? What are you talking about? The silver-haired man looked at Henderson. Mr. Henderson, do you know who Alina Vance is? Henderson shrugged. She's a nurse, a problematic one. We're in the process of terminating her employment. The man shook his head. Incorrect. Alina Vance is a former special operations medic attached to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She holds a top-secret clearance. She was awarded the Bronze Star with valor for her actions in rescuing a hostage team under fire. She is not problematic. She is a hero, and you are attempting to fire her for saving the life of a person who was targeted by a foreign intelligence agency. The room went silent. Thorne's face drained of color. Special ops, he whispered. That's impossible. She's just a nurse. The man opened the folder. He slid a document across the table. It was Alina's service record, decorations, commendations, evaluations from generals. Read it, the man said. Thorne picked up the paper. His hands shook. He read the words, exemplary performance under extreme duress, advanced trauma life support expertise, tactical medical leadership. The lies he had told himself, the narrative he had built, crumbled in an instant. He had mocked a decorated war hero. He had fired a woman who had saved lives in ways he couldn't imagine. The truth is out. How does Thorne react? And what happens to Alina? Stay tuned for the final confrontation, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of ultimate vindication. While this was happening in the conference room, Alina was waiting in the lobby. She hadn't entered the hospital. She was standing outside near the SUV. Colonel Sterling stood beside her. It's done, he said. They know. Alina felt a wave of nausea. What now? She asked. Now, Sterling said, they come out and they apologize. As if on cue, the doors opened. Mr. Henderson emerged, looking pale and sweaty. Behind him was Dr. Thorne, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. They walked toward Alina. The reporters noticed. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust forward, but Henderson raised a hand. No questions, he said, please. Up in front of Alina. He looked at her not with disdain, but with fear. Ms. Vance, he said, his voice trembling. There has been a misunderstanding, a grave error in judgment. We would like to offer your job back with immediate reinstatement and a significant raise and a public apology. Alina looked at him. She looked at Thorne, who couldn't meet her eyes. She felt the eyes of the city on her, the cameras, the judgment. She could take the job. She could take the money. She could win. But would it change anything? Would it erase the humiliation? Would it fix the culture? She shook her head. No, she said. Her voice was clear, amplified by the silence of the crowd. I don't want my job back. I don't want your money. I want accountability. Henderson blinked. Accountability. Dr. Thorne, Alina said, turning to face him. You endangered a patient. You ignored medical evidence. You abused your power. You bullied your staff. That stops today. Thorne looked up. Alina, I was stressed. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting a chart, Alina said. Arrogance is refusing to listen when lives are at stake. You're not fit to lead, and I won't work for someone who doesn't respect the sanctity of life. She turned to Henderson. Fire him, or I will release my own statement, and I will include the names of every resident who witnessed his negligence. I will include the logs, I will include the truth, and the world will know what St. Jude's really stands for. Henderson looked at Thorne. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the federal agents standing nearby. He knew he had no choice. The liability was too great. The scandal would destroy the hospital. Dr. Thorne, Henderson said, his voice hard, please hand over your badge. You are suspended pending an internal investigation, effective immediately. Thorne stared at Henderson. You're firing me for her, he pointed at Alina. She's nobody, Sterling stepped forward. She's somebody, doctor. And you're nothing. Thorne looked at Alina. For a second, hatred flared in his eyes, but then it died, replaced by defeat. He unclipped his badge. He dropped it on the ground. It clattered on the pavement. He turned and walked away into the hospital, into the shadows of his own making. A satisfying moment, isn't it? The fall of the arrogant. If you enjoyed that twist, please share this video. Let's spread the story of Alina's courage. The aftermath was swift. The news spread like wildfire. Nurse hero exposes corrupt doctor. Special ops medic saves diplomat, fires chief. The headlines were everywhere. Alina became a S. Imbal, not just of medical competence, but of integrity. She didn't give interviews. She didn't seek fame. She disappeared again, but this time it was different. She wasn't hiding. She was choosing. She received offers from hospitals across the country, offers to lead trauma centers, offers to teach, offers to consult. She declined them all. She wanted to heal, not to perform. Weeks later, Alina was sitting in a park. The same park where the patient had been found. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. She was reading a book. A man sat down on the bench next to her. It was the patient, the diplomat's aide. He looked healthy, strong. He smiled at her. Ms. Vance, he said. Thank you. Alina looked up. You're welcome. I wanted to tell you, he said. My government knows what you did. They are grateful if you ever need anything at all. You have friends in high places. Alina smiled. I'm fine, she said. I'm just living my life, he nodded. Well, your life is extraordinary, don't forget that. He stood up and walked away. Alina watched him go. She felt a sense of peace. She had been vindicated, not by the hospital, not by the media, but by her own conscience. She had stood up for what was right. She had spoken truth to power, and she had survived. She closed her book. She stood up. She walked out of the park into the city. She didn't know what was next. Maybe she would go back to school. Maybe she would travel. Maybe she would find a new hospital, one that valued humility over ego. But she knew one thing. She was no longer the ghost. She was no longer the mouse. She was Alina Vance, and she was free. As we wrap up this story, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever had to stand up for what's right, even when it was hard? Let us know in the comments. Your stories inspire us. The story of Alina Vance is not just about a nurse and a doctor. It's about the systems we build, the hierarchies we accept, the voices we silence. In hospitals, in offices, in schools, there are countless Alinas, quiet, competent, overlooked, and there are countless Thornes, loud, arrogant, protected. But the tide is turning. People are waking up. They are realizing that competence doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and when it does, we need to listen. We need to create spaces where humility is valued, where integrity is rewarded, where the quiet ones are given the chance to lead. Alina's journey reminds us that our past does not define us, but it prepares us. Her military service gave her the skills to save a life, but her humanity gave her the courage to do it. She could have stayed silent. She could have let the patient die to protect her job, but she chose life. She chose truth, and in doing so, she changed everything, not just for herself, but for everyone who witnessed her stand. The residents at St. Jude's learned a lesson that night. They learned that rank is not righteousness, that titles are not truth, and that the person in the corner might be the most important person in the room. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. We have many more tales of justice, resilience, and human triumph coming your way. Your subscription supports independent storytelling. In the end, the hospital did change. Mr. Henderson implemented new protocols. He established a whistleblower protection program. He hired a new chief of emergency medicine, a woman who valued teamwork over ego. And though Alina never returned, her legacy remained. Her name was added to the plaque in the lobby, not as an employee, but as a benefactor of truth. A reminder to all who entered, listen to the quiet voices. They often have the most to say. And so Alina moved on. She found a small clinic in a rural town, a place where everyone knew each other, a place where status didn't matter, only care. She worked there as a nurse practitioner. She was respected. She was loved, and she was happy. She still kept her secrets. She still moved with that fluid, economical grace. But now, when she spoke, people listened, not because they were afraid, but because they knew she was right. We hope you enjoyed this journey with Alina. If you did, please hit the like button. It's a small gesture, but it helps us continue to create content that matters. The moral of the story is clear. Integrity is its own reward. Humility is a strength, not a weakness. And justice, though sometimes delayed, is inevitable. When we stand up for what is right, we may face resistance. We may face ridicule. We may face loss. But we will never lose our self-respect. And that is worth more than any title, any salary, any approval. So the next time you see someone being overlooked, remember Alina. The next time you feel silenced, remember her voice. The next time you face an injustice, remember her courage. You have the power to change your narrative. You have the power to speak your truth. Don't let the thorns of the world deaf. In EU, define yourself. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, click on the video suggested on your screen now. It's another tale of unexpected heroes and well-deserved justice. We think you'll love it. In the quiet moments of our lives, we often wonder if we matter, if our actions have impact. Alina's story proves that they do. One moment, one decision, one act of courage, it can change everything. It can save a life. It can topple a tyrant. It can inspire a community. So be brave, be kind, be true, and never underestimate the power of the quiet ones. Before you go, take a second to comment below. What was your favorite part of Alina's story? Was it the diagnosis, the confrontation, the reveal? We love hearing your thoughts. As the sun set on St. Jude's, the lights of the ER continued to glow. New patients arrived, new crises unfolded, new doctors and nurses rushed to help, but the atmosphere was different, lighter, more respectful. The ghost of Alina Vance lingered, not as a specter of fear, but as a beacon of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest hours, competence and compassion will always prevail. And somewhere in a small town far away, Alina Vance smiled. She poured a cup of coffee. She opened a book, and she rested, knowing that she had done her duty, knowing that she was free, knowing that she was enough. This concludes our script for today. We hope it brought you joy, inspiration, and a sense of satisfaction. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep whispering your truth.